reflection on the screen. All right, so along the lines of best practices, as it relates to true development, formalized deployment processes, I truly support this type of implementation because in the development environment, even if they were using virtual machines, they have to leverage an external source control. Where, on the other hand, we can leverage source control that's actually built into the SharePoint platform. And you should truly take advantage of that. All right? Also, for my SharePoint publishing features, again, it's built into the package. I wish I could jump into more of the actual how-tos and show you more, and maybe during the question and answers, if you all allow me, I can go in and change a master page, and then we can actually see how it's actually pushed out. But again, it can be configuration, changes using the actual browser. It can be manipulation of the actual master page itself. It should force you to check it out, get an exclusive access, you manipulate it, and then have it pushed out. And so, look like my just in case will come in handy. So let's say, here is my default master page. This is my favorite master page of all time. All right, so out of the box, when I implement this publishing template, this is what I have. So what I do is I change this master page, right? And so I have a new layout, right? Remember, the master page is overly responsible for the layout of your pages, meaning it brings to the page your what we call our content placeholders, content placeholders, where it allows me to put content in different places. And so I take that page layout and I can control the layout of the actual content. And so when I make this change here, when I go in and I take advantage of my content deployment, right, I have it configured and it's kicked off, right, and let's say I'm leveraging the automated process, it's going to take that change and push it out to my production environment, which is, again, read-only. What I love about this actual implementation is that we take advantage of what's out of the box. I don't have to go through a formalized development process to implement such a solution. And believe me, for those who are control freaks, I'm a control freak. How many are control freaks? Come on out the closet. Control freaks, you gotta let it go. You gotta empower your customers, especially my developers. You all are the most resistant because of what happened with the last version. What happened with the last version? I don't know, Korea, but it wasn't good. Who said that? Well, there was a problem with caching pages from the database. This version, they solved that. Now the issue is, do we follow a centralized approach? If so, SharePoint Designer is not your tool. Leveraging the publishing feature is not going to be your tool. We leverage Visual Studio. But if it's more of a decentralized strategy, not only on manipulating the master pages and the cascading style sheet, but we remove IT out of the process and allow the content owners to approve of their own content that's automatically published to the pages, then we can use SharePoint Designer and we can totally leverage the browser. All right, so based on my time, we're supposed to have question and answers.
I think it's 220.
It's 220?
I think it's in the entrance.
Is it 220?
Well, the following session starts at 2:20.
So mine is at 210. I end at 210. They gotta have 10 minutes to set up. All right, no questions? Oh, cool. I was gonna say step up to the mic, but okay, listen.
So what about the case where you have, say, a vendor who's doing the initial build out of a SharePoint site, so they have their own farm internal in their offices, and then you've got to deploy that content, in that case, to a client environment, which is on a totally different network, SharePoint farm, et cetera. What's the recommended best practice for going from point A to point B in that case?
That's an excellent question. The question is in reference to if your vendor have their own farm and they're building content. And when we talk about content, we are talking about master pages.
Exactly what we're talking about.
Master pages, ASPX pages for my views, my forms. how do we move that content, right? We're using the SharePoint tools, not Visual Studio, nothing from an assembly based. How do we copy that content from that farm going across the internet, right, to the destination farm? Content deployment does support that type of deployment. But again, you're subject to some serious bottlenecks. So I would be concerned with the size of the content. Now, if it's something more on an incremental basis, very small, you can do it. Now, some other individuals will probably recommend taking SharePoint Designer and creating a backup. That's probably what you've seen. And they ship it to you, maybe on a hard disk, CD, and then have you implement it. I would not leverage that particular process to push out content. If the content is relatively in small size, I would only be concerned with the initial synchronization using content deployment. And then, of course, I'm expecting smaller pieces. But you want to make sure you test it out. It has to be well tested.
So I know you haven't tested it, but again, the deployment wizard, which just makes use of the SharePoint's administrative command line tool, will actually allow you to deploy your content to a disk, and then, like your SharePoint GUI, you don't have to bring in the permissions associated with that.
Right. Well, when you're publishing content, even the content deployment feature, in between farms, especially with different permissions, it doesn't do you any good to deploy the security descriptors with your actual content. That was a great question. Thanks for adding that.
When you update your default master in the site, does that automatically update the default.aspx page that comes up when you actually go to the site and URL?
So what type of update? Maybe changing, adding a control?
Picture in there.
Okay. The question is in reference to if I manipulate my default.master page for a site. Let's say I add an image. Is it automatically reflected in associated pages, ASPX pages? And the answer is yes. As long as you have not customized any of those views or those forms or other types of content pages, let's say I go into, on my page layout, I can override content from the master page. If you're overriding content from the master page, then no, that would not work, especially in the same place. But if you haven't, it would actually quick out those actual changes. Question?
The ultimate branding. I'm lucky that I'm only serving one company, and while it's cute, I dislike the little SharePoint insignia. So I want to get rid of it on the administration pages, but I only have SharePoint Designer. Can I reach that in the 12.5 through Designer?
Oh, next time you want to hit a low blow, let me know.
Sorry. You can answer no and then move.
The answer is no. It's not happening. SharePoint Designer does not have access to any admin pages unless you install SharePoint Designer on the server. And you need to be beat if you didn't. Just want to make sure I express my dislike for such an implementation.
I'm still convincing my admins the Visual Studio has to be on the server. I don't think they did.
Oh, wow. 2 slaps.
Yeah.
All right, question.
We've talked about making content changes, things like page layouts, master pages, stuff like that. What about things like item style, .xsl and stuff? Will the content deployment handle moving out changes to those system files? Like, I mean, that's what you're editing to change the look and feel for lists and things like that.
That's a good question. The question is in reference to pushing out changes to system files.
Yeah.
If you have a requirement to change system files, you will not use this type of implementation. You will actually go back to the formalized deployment process. And so if there are some system file changes made by way of Visual Studio, and let's say I did have my authoring environment and my production environment on 2 separate hardware, then you need to make sure you implement those features on both physical environments so that it can be targeted to both the authoring environment, which is also known as the mirror, and your production environment. SharePoint Designer is a database tool, everybody. You'll notice that anytime you open up a site, you're using the HTTP protocol. You ever notice that? And it's scoped at the site. So SharePoint Designer only allows us to overcome some small limitations.
Any suggestion for porting SharePoint Designer workflows from one environment to another, say from